Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Dennis Saliba, Occult and Tiana. And in today's stream, I'm going to be reviewing some of the medical literature on autism and its connections with DMT. Likewise, I'm also going to be connecting this to Manly P. Hall's The Pineal Gland, taken from the grand symbol of the mysteries. This book here, which I have in hard copy. And it talks about the occult significance of the pineal gland and how it connects to the occult and what it really means. So a pretty interesting stream ahead, very cutting edge research and things that the alt scene isn't really exploring right now at this very stage, but still very interesting stuff nonetheless. I'm just going to increase my volume a little bit. I got a new setup going on. Hope you can all hear me. All right. Hit that. So yeah, feel free to come by live now. Let's get started with our very first unit. I say that all the time from school. Let's get started with our first part of the stream, Frontiers in Endocrinology. Now, I'm going to preface in this part of the stream that I am not I am not an endocrinologist, okay? I'm just reporting on research already completed. I am not an endocrinologist, and I don't have a scientific background in the hard natural sciences. Just reviewing what is there. Okay, so an updated view on the relation of the pineal gland to autism spectrum disorders by Tal Shomrat and Nir Nesher, Rupin Academic Center, Faculty of Marine Sciences, and also based in Israel, it seems. So identification of the biological features of autism is essential for designing an efficient treatment and for prevention of the disorder. Though the subject of extensive research, the neurophysiological features of autism remain unclear. One of the proposed biological causes of autism is malfunction of the pineal gland and deficiency of its principal hormone, melatonin. I can tell you that melatonin is a very commonly prescribed hormone that the pharmaceutical company does give to young children. I have had this treatment myself, and normally it has the effect of helping you to fall asleep, because a lot of autism tends to be connected to, let's say, it tends to be connected to sleeping disorders as well. So they do prescribe melatonin to children from time to time. The main function of melatonin is to link and synchronize the body's homeostasis processes to the circadian and seasonal rhythms and to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. Therefore, pineal dysfunction has been implicated based on common observation of low melatonin levels and sleep disorders associated with autism. In this perspective, we highlight several recent findings that support the hypotheses of pineal gland melatonin and improvement in autism. Another common symptom of autism is abnormal neuroplasticity, such as cortical overgrowth. I think cortical overgrowth is a section of the brain, and dendritic spine dysgenesis. So that's like part of the shaping within the spinal column, if I remember correctly. Here we synthesize recent information and speculate on the possibility that this abnormal neuroplasticity is caused by hyperactivity of endogenous NN dimethyltryptamine, DMT. The pineal gland was opposed to the source of DMT in the brain, and therefore our assumption is that besides melatonin deficiency, pineal dysfunction might also play a part in the development of autism through abnormal metabolism of DMT. We hope this manuscript will encourage future research of the DMT hypothesis and re-examination of several observations that were previously attributed to other factors to see if they could be related to pineal gland or melatonin malfunction. Such research could contribute to the development of autism by exogenous melatonin and monitored light exposure. So, yeah, it's a pretty interesting piece of research that we see so far. So, introduction. After decades of intensive research have revealed a wide range of physiological features, genetic and environmental effectors, which have been suggested to be the cause, trigger, or to enhance the risk of autism spectrum disorder, yet none of the hundreds of gene mutations or environmental conditions have been found to be consistently present across the wide spectrum of heterogenic autistic population. One of the proposed biological causes of autism is malfunction of the pineal gland, or so it's hypothesized. The pineal gland is a minute neuroendocrine gland located deep in the center of the brain, projecting from the posterior wall of the third ventricle. Its position on top of the third ventricle allows direct secretion of the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, in addition to the main route of hormone secretion of the blood. Just making sure I read that properly. Yeah, the main route of hormone secretion in the blood. Interestingly, an average excess of CSF volume in the subarachnoid space was detected in autistic infants. Increase in CSF volume could have an influence on the concentration and effectiveness of the components it delivers to the brain. Melatonin is considered as the principal hormone produced by the pineal gland, and its well-documented function is to link and synchronize the body's homeostasis processes to the circadian and seasonal rhythms and regulate the sleep-wake cycle. Melatonin synthesis and secretion are mainly controlled by photosensory information that arrives from the suprachiasmatic nuclei, or SCN. The SCN control of the pineal gland creates a strong circadian rhythm with high levels of melatonin secretion in the dark at night and negligible levels during the day. As we will see, melatonin functions through several receptors and mechanisms. In short, in the most characterized pathways, which are assumed to be the main targets of melatonin, are the membrane-specific G protein-coupled melatonin receptors, MT1 and MT2. These two principal receptors are expressed through the brain. In addition, due to its lipophilic trait, melatonin is permeable to biological membranes and binds to intracellular proteins such as calmodulin, and directly and indirectly affects nuclear receptors like the receptor family RZR and ROR, which act as transcriptional activators to induce immunomodularity effect. Moreover, recent studies proposed a putative binding site to quinone reductase 2, or MT3, a detoxification enzyme with metabolic and antioxidative effects. So it governs quite a lot. Melatonin does govern quite a lot by the looks of things. It's connected to diet. It's connected to... Hey, Lonnie's Journey, LFG, he says. How you doing, man? How you doing? LFG, let's effing go. Indeed, LFG, let's effing go. All right. It's a lot of sciencey stuff here, but we do have to trudge on through it because it's very important. So yeah, melatonin regulates parts of the diet. It regulates parts of the sleep cycle. It also regulates parts of the cleaning of the hormones as well within the brain. So it's a very important part of our body. Actually, melatonin takes effect even at early stages of embryo fetal development. Actually, even before embryo development, melatonin affects oocyte quality and possibly induces epigenetic modulation inside the oocyte. During pregnancy, the embryo depends on maternal melatonin since the pineal gland is activated only after birth. Maternal concentrations of melatonin increase after 24 weeks of gestation, with significantly higher levels after 32 weeks. Melatonin receptors are widespread in the embryo and fetus from early stages, both in the nervous system and in peripheral organs. Melatonin influences the internal rhythms of the offspring from the mother and has direct developmental and neuroprotective effect on the fetal brain. Besides, the maternal source melatonin is synthesized by the placenta, which also expresses MT1 and MT2 receptors that mediate the direct effects of the placental maintenance. Bastinek showed them in melatonin receptors in the pituitary gland decrease drastically postnatal and maintain the same quantity in the hypothalamus. This finding implies different roles for melatonin during pregnancy and postnatal, and displays dynamic distribution of melatonin receptors as been found in placenta during pregnancy for day and night expression in the brain. From the above, it is clear that impairment of the melatonin pathway during pregnancy might increase risk of neurodevelopmental disorders such as ASD. The link between autism and pineal gland melatonin malfunction was first recognized after observations revealing low concentrations of melatonin in individuals with autism. About 65% of patients have less than half the average values of melatonin. Moreover, sleep disorder is one of the most common symptoms in ASD patients, with prevalence of 50 to 80% compared to 9 to 50% in normal or neurotypical children. Also, exogenous treatment with melatonin was found to be very beneficial in reducing the time until onset of sleep, increasing sleep duration. Genetically, autism associated mutations have been found in genes encoding the key enzymes of melatonin synthesis, arginine and an acetyl transferase or RNAT and acetyl serotonin and O-methyl transferase ASMT, as well as a reduced expression of gene encoding AANAT in ASD. Gene abnormalities have also been found in gene encoding of the melatonin receptors MT1 and MT2. Through a systematic review of Rossignol and Fry, concluded that the contribution of genetic variations of melatonin deficiency are presented in only a small percentage of individuals with ASD. Here we highlight recent information that we suggest further supports the pineal gland melatonin hypothesis. In addition to the link between melatonin and ASD, we propose new insights in the light of the recent work by Calvin Lai et al., speculating on the possibility that abnormal metabolism of endogenous DMT, possibly from the pineal gland, might cause aberrant neuroplasticity and neuroconnectivity abnormalities observed in autistic patients. So the mechanisms and the governing mechanisms are all connected to all of this. So this is very interesting stuff. Hey, Dennis, US, by the people, for the people. Deficiency of melatonin, that's the relaxation hormone secreted by the pineal gland. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I thought it just might be unrelated to autism. Well, apparently it is related to autism, but with the genetic encoders and readers of the hormone itself, not just the brain structure, but even some of the genes that are responsible for coding and decoding the hormone as part of the sleep and the mood regulatory cycles. Recent findings reveal a possible link between autism and pineal gland and melatonin malfunction. So this is from Brahm et al. Included a supplementary table in their recent work that summarizes several observations that could be associated with melatonin deficiency in the autistic child or the mother. So this might be inheritable. This might be inherited from the mother. Here we take some of their notes and expand the concept within our insights. In addition to the chronobiological function, melatonin has two other putative roles. First, melatonin is considered to be one of the most efficient and vital endogenous antioxidants found in brain and body tissues. Therefore, melatonin deficiency might cause neuronal damage induced by oxidative stress. Secondly, there is accumulating data indicating that melatonin is an immunomodularity compound within immunostimulant or anti-inflammatory properties. Immune system abnormalities have been reported in children with autism, which might demonstrate an additional link between the pineal gland and ASD. During embryonic and infant development, the pineal is the first gland to develop in the fetus, reaching its mature size at 2 years. However, melatonin production is not significant until or during the first 3 years of life. From the 4th month, the levels of nocturnal melatonin secretion steadily increase, reaching a peak at age 3 to 5. This timescale has some degree of the correlation with the age of autism diagnosis after the first year of birth, and mainly between the ages of 2 and 4 when symptoms are clearly present. Thalman et al. Reported an association between low melatonin excretion during the first prenatal weeks to delayed psychomotor development that first presented at 6 months of age, which correlates with the earliest time that autism spectrum disorder symptoms might be evident. Aside from the above, re-examination of other observations from ASD could reveal novel correlations. I'm not going to look into the novel correlations because I want to skip on ahead a little bit. Additionally, adults with ASD appear to be at significant risk for developing type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, and cancer. These diseases and autism share significant risk factors that are not directly linked to melatonin, such as obesity and genetic mutations. However, it has been suggested that melatonin is a protective factor against cancer and coronary heart disease. That's interesting. They talk about links to Alzheimer's as well. They talk about breastfeeding is also the main source of melatonin during the first months of life. Light and daylight isn't a contributing factor, so daylight hours, and through vitamin D also affects the creation of melatonin as well. And when lighting is dim, this is strongly influenced by artificial lighting and in the blue light range. That also affects hormone production as well and hormone concentration. I'm just going to skip on ahead because it's a review of other fields there, but it is pretty interesting. But there's still things we may not know in terms of other chemical interactions of the brain. That's right. The brain is, after all, the least studied organ as opposed to much of the body. That's also correct. So yeah, we don't know the full picture. We're just saying that there's newer trends emerging. It has previously been suggested that abnormal neural plasticity, such as cortical overgrowth and dendritic spine dysgenesis, is a common neurological symptom in ASD. Abnormal activation of the mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR, has been proposed as the case for these abnormal developments in ASD. In addition, it was suggested that disruption of brain-derived neurotrophic factor activity through tyrosine kinase B signaling might play a role as well in autism initiation and propagation. Interestingly, Disruption of melatonin synthesis in ASD was associated with an increase of the melatonin precursors, serotonin and NAS. NAS was found to be an agonist of TRKB receptor. Therefore, in conjunction with serotonin, might contribute to the abnormal neuroplasticity in ASD. A recent study of drosophila. A recent study by Lai et al. Showed that treatment of drosophila and rats in DMT increases neuritogenesis, spinogenesis, and synaptogenesis through 5H2A2A receptors and TKRB and mTOR signaling. The work of Lai et al. Contributed to recent accumulated data of the effect of psychedelics. I'm going to explain this. Like LSD and DMT, structure analogs on neuroplasticity through cellular mechanisms such as BDNF, pathway, and even long-term influence of gene expression in the brain. The significant finding within the work of Lai et al. Is that they show these effects of DMT, which found to be endogenous in the brain. Based on the above, we propose that ASD may be affected by abnormal metabolism and endogenous DMT, as we can see here. So basically, the summary of everything that I've read is that the pineal malfunction causes tryptophan and serotonin, and then the serotonin is not produced at the right level, and then obviously that creates issues for melatonin production, tryptamine or DMT going into the blood circulation of the brain. As such, gene mutations and irregular expressions related to melatonin synthesis is a pathway in ASD. Average excess of CSF volume in the subarachnoid space was detected in autistic infants. Hypersensitivity of 5H2HT2A and the hypofunction of SERT could result in an elevated effect of DMT. So we process things at a higher level of intensity. The high level of NAS caused hyperactivation of this receptor, and it was suggested that TRKB signaling play a role in autism initiation and propagation, which leads to hyperactivation of mTOR, and then there's abnormal neuroplasticity with cortical overgrowth, dendritic spine dysgenesis. We read about that before. And here, bufotenine, a DMT analog, has been found in elevated urine levels in ASD patients. That's interesting. Decreased activity of MAOA results in hyperactivity of DMT. DMT enhances or enhanced neuroplasticity through the H5-2A receptor, and the mild DMT psychedelic effect leads to synesthesia, sensory sensitivity, and hyper attention to visual details, attraction to geometric shape. I remember that as a kid. I would love geometric shapes as a kid. Same as lots of focus on visual details, hallucinations, and extended pupils. So that blackening effect in the iris can be connected with autism as well. So that's that there. That's up there. As we know, DMT is widely found in plants and animals, and although there have been indications of endogenous DMT in animals since the 60s, only in the last decade it was indisputably proven that DMT is present in humans, naturally produced through the spinal column and processed through the pineal gland. So I'm not going to read too much into the production of the DMT because we know it's correlated and it's proven. We know that it is naturally occurring as well. We just note that there is a psychedelic function and we don't know precisely what it is because it is very controversial. What we do know is that the pineal gland is connected to sleep, it's connected to dreaming, it's connected to aspects of creativity as well, and it's also connected to autistic behaviors related to synesthesia, sensory sensitivity, hyper attention to visual details, attractions to geometric shape, hallucinations, and extended pupils, all of which are observed. So is the concentration of DMT in the brain actually higher than what has been detected? So from the above, it is clear that any attempt to propose a biophysiological effect for DMT should first address the concentration issue. Barker, studies conducted by Barker pointed out several critical factors were not taken into account in the previous work. And might explain tiny concentrations of non-physiological endogenous DMT found in the brain. 3 of these factors are relevant to the production of DMT, which, as in the case of melatonin, might vary largely over the course of the day, seasonally and according to age. First, none of the works checked for circadian changes, okay? Second, the age of the examined subjects was not taken into consideration, so maybe there should be a control group. Maybe for future research, they should have a control group of, let's say, 3 to 5-year-olds, second control group of teenagers, and a third control group of young adults would be worth examining. Third, for obvious reasons, most data were collected from blood and urine samples, and only a few tested DMT levels in the CSF, where the pineal gland directly deposits the compounds produced. DMT concentration in the brain might also alter significantly according to the mental state of the subject. For example, varying under stress conditions. Therefore, although not directly related to the pineal gland and as yet unproven, it was suggested that DMT might be accumulated in vesicles in the brain, building a reservoir ready to release in effective concentrations. Another speculation is that DMT releases in a local and specific manner, which attributes it to reach effective concentration. The small amount of detected concentration of DMT could be partially attributed to efficient enzyme monoxamine oxidase, which readily catalyzes DMT. However, there is evidence that decreased activity of MAOA in the brain of children with ASD. Similar other mutations associated with ASD and MAOA is X-linked to recessive gene and therefore correlates with the 4-to-1 male to female ratio of those who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum disorder. MAOA dysfunction could also be caused by endogenous MAOA inhibitors, such as piniline, that is thought to be produced by the pineal gland. Moreover, Kaluza, Zablinska et al. Argued that their preliminary results indicate the existence of endogenous MAOA inhibitor in the urine of ASD children, and that this abnormality is possibly related to pineal gland malfunction. Moreover, Davis et al. Found that polymorphism of this specific gene is associated with brain structure volumes in children in autism. So for the work of Lai et al., they tested concentrations that DMT produced a psychedelic effect of roughly 10 milligrams per kilogram. Moreover, they did not check lower concentrations. Therefore, their finding could not rule out the possibility that neuroplasticity could also be affected over time by trace concentration. Interestingly, they did find the same effect on neural activity in 10 milligram per kilogram hallucinogenic doses and 1 milligram per kilogram subhallucinogenic doses alongside alongside fighting 5-HT2AR. It has been proposed that DMT and or closely related compounds such as butyrphene have an effect and possible physiological function in neuroplasticity and immune system. I've already read that before. Finally, it has been suggested that in ASD there is a decrease in serotonin binding to this specific hormone, while hypersensitivity to agonist drugs and hypo or hyperfunction of the serotonin uptake transporter, DMT, has been shown to be taken up in neuronal cells via SERT. Therefore, it is possible that hypofunction of SERT and hypersensitivity of said hormone could result in an elevated effect of DMT. Drawing from all these recent studies, we postulate that pineal gland dysfunction and or MAOA malfunction metabolism results in hyperactivity of DMT, causing abnormal neuronal development associated with autism spectrum disorders, possibly through the mechanism proposed by Lai et al., as we saw in that figure further back. This is the figure here, where basically the receptors of tryptamine, INMT, DMT through the blood circulation of the brain is literally processed differently on a genetic level through either dysfunctions in genetic markers or differences in genetic markers. The receptors are not processing it differently, and possibly even within the bloodstream absorbing the DMT from the pineal gland directly, as opposed to it being broken down in the stomach with a neurotype, neurotypical individuals, and then later secreted out in the broken down form, whereas in autism, that may not be the case. It might be more the case that the DMT is actually not broken down properly and shot into the bloodstream, and then the bloodstream is responsible for directly absorbing the DMT. Hence, the states of trances that people on the spectrum can experience, as well as the euphoria too. States of euphoria, I know because I've worked with them in the past. In conclusion, a wide range of recent studies provide new support for the hypothesis that pineal gland dysfunction and abnormal metabolism of its related products might be a significant, still unrevealed cause of ASD. Elevated levels of the endogenous psychotomimetic module butyrphene has been reported in the urine of ASD patients, but as far as we know, no assessment of DMT in ASD patients has yet been performed. We hope this perspective will encourage future research and test the hypothesis that DMT metabolism is associated with ASD development, and re-examination of the results attributed to vitamin D dysfunction only, this time based on the pineal gland and melatonin malfunction premise. The results of such studies have the potential to lead full treatment and maybe prevention procedure for ASD using exogenous melatonin, even for infants. In addition, treatment could include monitoring of light exposure in infants, toddlers, and pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers, and providing pumped breast milk to the infants according to the time it was expressed, in order to assure the proper levels of melatonin. And there's many references here. There's something like nearly 100, if not like 108, almost 100 references there. So that's a very, very interesting medical study. It does raise questions concerning aspects of shamanism, autism and shamanism, and the possibility that autism may be a form of the new shamans of the modern age. And is it possible that they, as I'm working towards my theory in the occult sense, is it possible that the autistic person or individual is indeed the one who sees, the one who hears, the one who feels, and are they potentially the shamanic archetype of the modern age? That's a question that I would like to explore further. Now, I'm going to go on to Manly P. Hall's The Pineal Gland, the Eye of God, hence the title. And this is one of his chapters in Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries. So as we see, there's a cross-section of the human head. In this figure, we see the corpus callosum, the septum lucidium, corpus callosum, the septum lucidium, the pituitary body, the pineal gland, and the quadrigeminal bodies. So mainly P holds the eye of the mysteries. So I'm going to read through this. I couldn't find a printed text that you could read with me on this. Not a full printed text. Actually, I might see if I can get a full printed text. But I have the full copy here, just in case. The pineal gland, the eye of God, manly P hall. Let's see if we have the full thing here. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. It's about the closest thing that I can get, but is it all of it? Is this all of it though? I don't think so. I don't think I can have an online copy that's full. I can't find one. No, I can't. See if it's in the archive. No, not there. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to search for it. Okay, I'm going to have to read from this book, this print book. So as Manly P. Hall writes in chapter 16 of the Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries, as the pineal gland was one of the most recognized and written about by the earlier adepts, it is the logical beginning of any occult discussion of the endocrine chain. The epiphysis cerebri, or the pineal body, secures the name from its peculiar shape, the pinus or the pine cone, and arises in the 5th week of the human embryo as a mind sac branching off from that section of the brain which is next to in front of the midbrain in the diencephalon, which includes the area of the 3rd ventricle of the adjacent parts. The distal or remote portion of the sac becomes the body and of the gland. The primoxial proportion, or the portion of attachment of the origin, remains as the stalk. Is not this the pine cone in which E.A. Wallace Budge or Buge refers to his Osiris and the Egyptian resurrection, when in ascending the entry of Ani into the presence of Osiris and the Egyptian ritual of the coming forth by day as the so-called cone of Ani's wig, for which the good Egyptologist could find no intelligent reason. Is this not also the whirring cone, which was also among the symbolic playthings of the child Bacchus? That's funnily enough connected to the god of wine, I think, Bacchus, and which Basticius describes the small cone-shaped piece of wood around which cord was wound so that it might made to spin and give out a humming noise. See Orpheus, G.R.S. Mead. Those acquainted with the esoteric function of the pineal gland, or who may have experienced the whirring sound attendant upon its activity, will realize how apt is the analogy. In growths of the connective tissue of the pia mater, or mater, that delicate and highly vascular membrane, investing the brain and spinal column, later divide the body of the 12 into lobules. At birth, the structure is comparatively large, and by 12 years, it has attained full size. Here again, it is a possible analogy of the Bacchus myth, for the toy cone was a symbol peculiar to the childhood of the god. In other words, under normal conditions, the gland deteriorates with adolescence. Retrograde evolution or degeneration of the pineal body begins with the 6th or the 7th year and is practically complete by puberty. It should also be distinctly remembered, however, that whereas nature has eliminated other organs and parts of the primitive man, this has remained, and realizing nature's economy, we must recognize the gland as still contributing in some way to human functioning. According to Dr. J.F. Gunderschnach, formerly of Cornell University Medical College, several, at least 3, dorsal diverticular epiphyses develop during the 2nd month of fetal life from the roof of the dinocephalon. They are entirely rudimentary with men. The epiphyses proper is the posterior one and the only one in which man differentiates to any extent. There are other paraphyses at the parietal eye, a rudimentary sense organ of some reptiles. According to Haeckel, that cannot see, there are to be found in certain animals deeply placed within the head, covered by thick skins and muscles. Thyrsus, or the thymus, I can't even pronounce that. The thymus, or the scepter of the Greek mysteries. Maybe that's Thyrsus of the Greek mysteries, consisted of a staff surmounted by a pine cone and twisted about with grape and ivy leaves. Of the spinal cord, the nadus and the plexus, the pineal and the pneumogastric nerve, all closely related to the mysteries of regeneration. The pineal gland is described by Santi as a concertate body, or the corpus pineale, 6 millimeters high and 4 millimeters in diameter, joined to the roof of the 3rd ventricle of a flattened stalk in the habenula. The pineal body is situated in the floor of the transverse fissure of the cerebrum, directly below the splenium of the corpus callosum, and rests between the superior colossi and the quadrigeminal bodies of the posterior surface of the midbrain. That's what he's talking about, by the way. It is closely invested by pia mater. The interior of the pineal body is made up of closed follicles surrounded by ingrowths of connective tissue. The follicles are with epithelial cells connected with calcareous matter. The brain size acervula cerebri. Calcareous deposits are also found in the pineal stalk, along with the choroid plexus. The function of the pineal body is unknown. In reptiles, there are 2 pineal bodies, an anterior and a posterior, of which the posterior remains undeveloped, but the anterior forms a rudimentary cyclopean eye. In the Hatteria, a New Zealand lizard, it projects through the parietal foramen and presents an imperfect lens and retina, and in its long stalk nerve fibers. The human pineal is ultimately homologous with the posterior pineal body of the reptile. So there is a connection there with the reptile. That's why they describe it as the reptilian part of the brain with regards to the more survival aspects of the brain itself. The branchiostomata lanceolatum, the branchiostoma lanceolatum, a small transparent marine animal about 2 inches in length, is the only vertebrate so far as known which does not possess a pineal gland. In reptiles, according to Spencer, the gland is of considerable length and passes out, as noted by Santi, through an opening in the roof of the skull. In the chameleon, the gland lies under a transparent scale in the parietal foramen and is cord-like. It's cord-like middle structure according to scale in the parietal foramen. Its cord-like middle structure, according to Hertwig, bears a certain resemblance to the embryonic optic nerve. Investigators like Rabol Rockland and Abhorn Spencer and others have studied the pineal gland and are of the opinion that the pineal gland must be considered as an unpaired parietal eye, which in many cases, for example, reptiles, appears to be tolerably well preserved, but in most vertebrates is in process of degeneration. This learned author then affirms the probability that in reptiles the pineal gland acts onto the influences of light, but to what degree must remain undecided. In his lecture in the Eyes delivered at the Mayo Clinic and afterwards published by the American optical company Thomas Hall Shastid, a MMD FACS LLD, some of the amphibians had a median or a pineal eye, an eye in the back of their head. Many of the gigantic saurians, too, of the Mesozoic time had this eye, and in any geological museum, you can still see in the back of two of the giant lizard skull a hole through which the strange eye formerly looked out. Possibly for looking out for predators in case of them being hunted. In ourselves, the whole has been boned over. Now, this is interesting. And the eye has shrunk up in the so-called pineal gland. The pineal eye made its first appearance in the world far back among the invertebrates. It was far indeed an invertebrate eye, that is one with the rods turned toward the vitreous instead of away from it, and consequently with no blind spot, but it persisted until the vertebrate form of eye. Through some of the fishes, through the amphibians generally, the eye of the lizards, and then began degenerating, possibly because the vertebrates had other eyes, and these were of the vertebrate itself. Is the occultist then unreasonable when he affirms that in the beginning of life upon this planet, vertebrates were hermaphrodites and objectively one-eyed? Is it not more reasonable to agree with occultism that this gland, generally extended through the skull, somewhat like an antenna, as an organism of the generalized sense perception, that to accept the suggestions of Professor Lancaster, that man was originally transparent so that the outer eye could see through the walls of the head? Did the Egyptians know that reptiles present the highest development of this gland, and for some reason coiled the serpent upon their foreheads, where the third eye of Orientals is placed by symbolic license? Was not Urius the symbol of wisdom? Think Urius is an angel. The symbol of wisdom, and is not the pineal gland the organ of a method of acquiring knowledge which is no longer employed in general, but a secret preserved by the elect? That's a very interesting question. As an emblem of divinity, the pineal gland would naturally be associated with royalty, the crown. It's the crown chakra, part of the crown chakra, mind body. For the kings were shadows of the gods upon the earth. The lower crown of Lower Egypt and the Pshent, or the Pshent, or crown of the double empire of consolidated Egypt, were surmounted by a curious antenna, a feeler, or a very thin curved horn, which is most reminiscent of the descriptions of the structures which is reminiscent of the descriptions of the structures of the third eye that are descended from the first ages, the Ma'at, or the ostrich plume of the law, another Egyptian symbol of truth, is quite similar to the pineal gland in shape and was worn like the feather of the American Indians, as though rising from the parietal foramen. Many tribes' birds were regarded as emissaries between the Manidos and mankind. And bird feathers were worn in fashion could have easily had double significance. The peacock feather with its oscillated spot is attached to the head of the Chinese man. Sorry. The peacock feather with its oscillated spot is attached to the eye of the Chinese mandarin in a position somewhat similar to the pineal gland of the human head lying backward. And may have a similar origin. In occultism, the pineal gland is regarded as a link between the objective and subjective states of consciousness, or in exoteric terminology, the invisible and visible worlds of nature. This is a long book. Interesting. In the religions of the Latins, it was therefore referred to as Janus in modern English. I'm going to go with Janus or Hannes in Germanic, because it's a J. J is a H in Germanic. The two-faced god and keeper of the gate. I think it's just Janus. The two-faced god and keeper of the gates of the sanctuary. This divinity was the antitype of Saint Peter, who succeeded him as warder of the heavenly portals and who carries the two keys in his office on the golden mystery of the spirit, and the other to the silver mystery of the human body. The two-faced gods are frequently spoken of in ancient records. Herme, like Bifron's Janus, may be seen in old Roman villas, and in the occasional intriguing exception that one of the faces will be male and the other female, as the Herm Aphroditus again. So it's a recurring symbol here from Egypt. The female face represents the animal soul and the male the divine soul, and the whole figure is indicative of the occult structure and function of the pineal gland. This is a very interesting book. I'm going to have to cover this at a later stage because I'm feeling pretty tired. But just want to skip forward to the Masonic part. So he does talk about Descartes. He talks about Blavatsky. He segues into the Hindu mythology as well and that of the Tibetans. But it's a very consistent recurring symbol that there's the duality involved, the male and the female forming together as part of the hermaphrodite, and the hermaphrodite represents the development of the organ from the birth of the child and the beginning of the opening of the inside of the infant into the physical world. And of course, the all-seeing eye of the Masonic brethren, eye single of the scriptures, by which the body is filled with light, the one eye of Odin, but that might be appropriated, though, enabled him to know the mysteries of the eye of Horus, which at one time Typhon swallows up the eye of the Lord, which, as Boehme says, beholds all, the eye of all, which forms the basis of the secret doctrine of the eye of seeing and the eye of perception, basically akin to that of the Cyclops or the eye of Dang Ma, or the eye of Shiva, the eye of creation, or as in the Tibetan traditions, that this would be the inscrutable face of Avalokiteshvara. When the inner man is active, the eye swells and expands, and the Arhat is able to feel the activity and regulate his actions accordingly. He also talks about the Zohar. He talks about many traditions here. So very interesting read. The eye of God is indeed connected to the cone and the pineal gland and the perceptions between the worlds, between the physical and the invisible. So very interesting parallels across many traditions. Let me know what you think. And as always, stay discerning, keep discerning. Discern me as well, because I'm learning just as much as you guys are. So I will leave that with you guys. Humanus Invictus, the human soul is not conquered. As today, as we've seen in today's stream, we've explored the connections between the occult significance of the pineal gland and how it could be connected with autism. And my working theory is that many of the signs of autism are very much connected to the shaman archetype, the healer, the seer, the feeler, the seer between the worlds, and the communicator between the worlds. But with that, I leave you. Take care. And the human spirit is always undefeated. You are infinite consciousness having a human experience.